Hello, 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 everybody. We are live. This is Tom Coltabiano, and I'm glad you can join me today. I have David Wild will be joining us. I look forward to this conversation, and I'm going to ask David to join us many more times. And I think one of the most interesting things about having David on the show is you get a perspective that you don't have when you are working on the show. And so David, I won't embarrass him when he's on here, and he's not a big Instagram guy. He's much more of a Twitter guy. But David's credits are incredible. He wrote for Rolling Stone forever, and so hello, there's David. I'll wave to you, David. He wrote for Rolling Stone forever. He has unbelievable stories with some of the biggest rock stars in the world, and I'll ask him about them. But he took a liking to the show early on, and it may... just trying to see if Dave... Yes, okay. I think it comes as a surprise to a lot of people how poor Everett Raymond was doing in the ratings. So, hello, David.
Hey, Tom.
Oh, good. You sound fantastic.
That's because Fran, as you know, is much more organized than I am, and she's right in front of me making sure this goes okay.
Oh, and I love Fran, obviously. He's talking about his wife. David is talking about his wife. And David, I know you do own a house, but you're just outside because it's a stunningly beautiful day.
I have spent about 4 months. Oh, that sounds good. Because there's a car chase. I love car chases. I basically haven't worked inside in this pandemic period. I love being outside. You know, I like the long walks, so I'm just considering working now as one big long walk.
Yes.
Other than my first Zoom was with the Beastie Boys and Spike Jones, and that I did in my bed. And then I started to do my second one in a bed in my bed, from my bed. She was not in my bed, with Susanna Hoffs, and she had a song called My Side of the Bed. I made a joke about that, felt awkward, and then I've been outside ever since. For 400, the next 400 Zooms.
So I should say, I was saying before about your unique perspective, and I think one of the reasons that it's great to have you join is, it'll be great when we talk to Ray and Patty and everybody else on the show, but as a journalist, you are able to frame so much better than the
I'm
people
doing it right now.
than the people that are involved. And I think I don't think you know this, but one of my favorite movies was The Right Stuff. And when I read Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff, that opened my whole it opened my eyes to such power that journalism can have in framing for people.
Yeah, and I have none of that power. I introduced Tom Wolfe once in LA for like a speaking engagement. I was asked to introduce him, and it was like the worst opening act before the Rolling Stones. It was like, it wasn't even like Prince getting booed off. It was like Prince Andrew getting booed off before the Rolling Stones. And then the second time, I was supposed to then go to San Francisco and introduce him, and I was getting up to speak, and there was a power outage, and I never got to do it.
Oh, wow.
That's my only Tom Wolfe story.
By the way, what's funny is I'm going to go back and just give a little bit more picture of you, David, because that's what I was saying before you joined. Yeah,
let's talk about me. Forget Raymond.
Yes, I'm going to risk embarrassing you. And I posted a picture of your friend's book and the Everett Raymond book, and you ended up hosting a lot of our Inside the Writers' Room lives. But you have such a storied career, and even though you just said Tom Wolfe, it took me so much to drag names out of you. And finally, I was like, David, it's true. I would say, I remember we were talking about dating. And I said, well, how did you know that you should marry Fran, who ended up being your wife? And he said, there's a guy who said, you gotta marry her. And then I'd known you enough that I said, okay, well, who was that guy? Because it could have been a friend from Jersey. Right? Could have been a friend from New Jersey that you knew.
If you met my friends from Jersey. You knew I wouldn't go to them. They would not be the go-to.
Right. But it was Paul McCartney, and you were in South America on a bus, or?
Well, you're making it sound 10% better, but the truth is it was Linda. I was on the road with Paul and Linda in America and then in South America. And this is a very rare thing, but Linda took a liking to me. This has happened, 8 or 9 people like me on
Is
Earth.
it rare that a woman likes you, or rare that Linda
Human,
likes somebody?
human. It's
Human
rare that
being.
a human,
Okay.
very rare that a human vegetarian, but especially a human. No, in any case, she was super wonderful, nice person. And about 3/4 through the trip, she goes, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And in retrospect, I'm thinking, was she going to set me up with one of her daughters, or was she asking me,
Oh.
trying to get me to come out of a closet? I don't know what was her thinking, but I said, "Yeah, I just met this great girl, and in fact, we were going to play. We were going to play, yeah, like I was in the band." Yeah, I played backup keyboards to Linda. But in any
Nice.
case, she said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I said, "Well, actually, yeah, I'm dating. I just started dating this girl. I think it was like 2 or 3 dates, and she was going to be in New York, Fran, and they were playing in Jersey at the big stadium. And she goes, bring her to sound check tomorrow. I want to meet this girl, and so, and then we'll have lunch." And I think in retrospect, it's a really good third or fourth date idea to say, you do want to come out, watch Paul McCartney sound check, and then have lunch with, Linda and meet the gang.
And
And
Fran didn't say, "Do you know what songs is it Wings songs? Or do you know?" And you said, "Well, does it matter? It's Paul McCartney." Or no, Fran was like, "Yes, this sounds
well,
good."
the irony is, like, Fran was not a particular music fan at all when we met. I mean, she did have she had the soundtrack to About Last Night. What was one, Fran, you thought you had? The other, what's that? Oh, she might have had Toto 4.
By the way,
Uh,
let me stop the story for a second, David. David hosted a show on Bravo called Musicians. So
Indeed.
David's whole life is music.
Yes.
So when your potential girlfriend says, "I have 1 or 2 albums, I guess, but music's not that important," I don't know why that's not a deal breaker.
Well, look at this face, Tom. Look at this. What your Italian people call this punum. When a cute girl likes you and a smart, successful, together one,
Okay.
you go with it. I will say that, like, right shortly after this, we went on we went to a party. We were not together, I guess, but she was paired with my friend who I brought to the party, Terrence Trent D'Arby. How's that for an ancient name drop? Because when you think, look at me and Terrence, we were actually movie buddies. We're the
Yeah.
only people who ever went to see Toys, the movie by Barry Levinson, twice together. But in any case, I brought him to a party at our the woman who actually kind of introduced us, and she was paired with Terrence at the party. And the answer in the game of celebrity was Bob Dylan. And I watched Terrence Trent D'Arby throw out Like a Rolling Stone, Mr. Tambourine Man, 18 songs, at which point Fran finally said, "I've got it, Bob Seger." So when Terrence came to our wedding, he goes, "You're marrying the Bob Seger girl?" Which is interesting. He had a British accent because he was from Florida, but that's another
And
story.
we should say, to end the story, the marriage has worked out
Well,
beautifully.
not for her, but
Yeah.
yes, for me.
Yeah. She signed on she knew what she was signing on for. So,
Yeah.
David, to steer it back to our Everest Raymond fans, what I was trying to paint the picture is,
Yes.
you have this crazy, diverse career,
Yeah.
and you've written a ton of books. And I took a picture of you holding up your friend's book.
Yes.
Okay. And so when you and I first met, you came down to this. Well, I just heard there's a guy on stage who's looking for photos. That's all I heard.
Well, can I
And
tell you the real story is you're close, but before this, I briefly was for a couple of years the TV critic for Rolling Stone, and I endeavored to review a whole fall series of shows, like the whole season of shows, and I didn't like anything. And the last review was, and there's one good new show, and that was Everybody Loves Raymond. And shockingly, Phil and Ray liked that, and they invited me to the set, and that's sort of around the time we met.
oh, so I didn't know how you ended up on the stage. I
Yes.
just knew there's some schmuck who needs photos. That's all I
Exactly.
knew. And so
That is my Hebrew name, some schmuck.
yes, no, well, we all knew that. Well, I guess the audience doesn't know that.
Yeah.
The people watching.
I think they guessed.
I think it might have been season 3 or 4. Not that important, but I had at that point more photos probably than you had access to for the Friends book, and we're only at the beginning because I took an insane amount of photos, and it's arguably the most photographed television show in history, because there were very few writers or people on a show for the entire run of the show, and then very few people who would shoot film, because there was no digital initially, or questionable digital photography. And so I was like, oh, somebody's gonna buy. I can't believe I'm gonna be rich. This is fantastic. And then I think you said, I need one photo. And so I said, okay, well, I have 6,000 others if you should need them. And then sorry, let's go back to that review though, because let's go back to the beginning of the season. That photo ended up being in your book called The Showrunners. And it's a great photo of the props department was trying out sunglasses for Ray, and Phil happened to be on stage, and they were both trying them out, and they're looking, and it's a black and white photo. And it was the first photo that I ever sold of them ever published, by me. And now, of course, I have a lot. But going back to the show premieres, it's in the Friday night slot. It's not a sexy show in any way. What's that?
You were the only sexy one on the show.
So I
stress were.
So the show is also, there's a bunch of giant celebrities that CBS has. And let's even go back bigger picture. CBS is in terrible shape. CBS, they are talking about CBS not being a network. That's how bad CBS was at that point. Seinfeld, Friends, NBC was just a powerhouse. And so CBS had no hits. So the president of CBS was trying to roll out big stars. Cosby, Ted Danson, Rhea Perlman, all of those were let's push that forward and let's make their shows front and center. So Everett's Rating was relegated to 8:30 p.m. on Friday night. And I think we were number 120 at one point. I mean, there was no, they didn't have any more shows not to watch. And then they're like, okay, well, Raymond, there's only one left. Let's watch it. And so as you're sitting there watching it, David, you had never heard of Ray Romano as a stand-up?
No, I actually had heard of him. I had moved from New York, where I think I caught Ray a few times. I don't know if it was the comic strip. I'm not sure where it would have been, but yeah, I knew I liked him. But what happened was that was a year of all the Friends ripoff shows, if I remember correctly. And so there were like 400 varieties of Friends. And it was also that moment that Friends sort of made the suggestion that TV could be hip and have good looking people and have, be topical and timely. And then there comes at the end of my watching 100 shows, seeing this show that is just so classic sitcom, so not trying to be hip or high concept. It was so low concept. It was like the concept was funny, and it just stood out instantly. Like I'm not that visionary. You know me, Tom. I'm not a visionary. But I could tell. I said, this is the one that might stick around. And I think I might be literally right. I'm not sure all those other shows would not be having on Instagram people talking about them right now.
Well, it's an interesting point, because when you go back and look at the reviews back then, it's, mediocre storylines, hackneyed mother-in-law jokes. Like, some of them are so brutal, angry reviews of the series. And you look, and I was looking at them like, okay, I don't want to trash any other shows, because what I wanted to get into is, because you have a unique perspective on being at ground zero when a network decides what to put on the air.
Oh, yes.
And so to get any show on the air is a huge accomplishment. But there were a lot of shows that premiered that you never heard of again, other than Everett's Raymond. And I had a friend who worked at Sony, and she said she was in a meeting and they just went down the line and they were like, okay, this show, Everett's Raymond, okay, that's gone. It's just, she's like, oh, I think you guys are going to get canceled, and I thought, oh, are we? Because it seemed like the show's pretty good. Nobody's watching it. Nobody cares, but it feels like it's fairly funny when you put it up against other shows. So then, David, you're on stage. I come down. I show you a bunch of photos. You're like, that's great that you're obsessively taking photos. I only need one photo, and I have to write this book about showrunners, which is a very not easy subject to cover, because you have to talk to showrunners who are very often mercurial, and they might be egotistical where they want to talk about themselves, but they're in the middle of juggling this crazy workload. And the vibe when you went on stage, I don't know if you were there for very long, but did you get, because let's just talk about the vibe on the set of Raymond versus the other shows that you've been, that you had been to at that point.
Oh, every show was nuts, and I would go to Friends, and it would be, I mean, I'd been to Friends previous to that, but you'd be there till 3 a.m. My wife would be mad when I got home, like, what happened to you? Raymond was the only show. It was like taking a warm bath in matzo ball soup. It was, like literally, it was like a bunch of Menchie writers sitting around a room telling stories that I could relate to, like the show itself, and and then worrying about lunch. It was ridiculous. And also leaving at a reasonable hour. Like you would beat the rush hour sometimes. And there was no other show that was that well run. And it's not like, now Phil is like all of us. We're all grand old men of TV. But and I thought, by the way, it helped inspire me to become a TV writer, really, because I saw, hold on, you can do this, have corned beef paid for, and then get home at a reasonable hour. So
Yeah,
that's why that eventually made me leave being a rock critic and become a TV writer.
I thought you were going to go back even bigger, going, how do I make my career so corned beef gets paid for? I don't care what it is.
Exactly.
Whatever gets that first. So let me just jump in and add a credit for you, David. You've written so many things since then. But one year I know you wrote the Emmys, the Grammys, the Oscars, and the Country Music Awards.
I think that's true, but I will point out the Oscars that I wrote was the James Franco and Hathaway Oscars that year. So I'm not sure I get any bonus points for that particular year.
I think statute of limitations has worn off, so you can't be charged with anything.
I think James Franco can, but I think I can't if I've read the law correctly.
So now you're on the set, and I just I think, David, for me, the whole reason to do this Instagram Live is just to try and share what it was like on the show. And I've been watching a lot of I Love Lucy reruns, and I just finished Desi Arnaz's autobiography. And it's fascinating because everything is a snapshot in time in history. So I Love Lucy came around at the beginning of television.
Is that the book called I Screwed Around on Lucy? Is that memoir?
It's called a book.
Oh,
he talks about that aspect.
Okay.
By the way, he's a fantastically likable human being. And in a tragic flaw, he cannot stop drinking and he cannot stop womanizing. And ultimately, it really is the demise of him. And if you watch, there's a documentary.
Oh my God. So he was exactly like the Latin version of Everybody Loves Raymond's Lou Schneider.
The most inside joke ever done. Yeah, Lou Schneider is one of our writers for everybody watching, and he's a super devoted family guy.
Who only humped a table in the writer's room, as far as I know. As
a joke, yes. One of the room bits.
My wife likes Lou and not me. She is happily married to Lou, but she's not happy.
Nice. Lou is the upstanding citizen that you want living next to you in your life with 3 fantastic sons. So Desi Arnaz, he builds I Love Lucy out of nothing. There was no 4-camera shoots. There was no live audience. And his whole motivation was he didn't want to go to New York because he wanted to be close to his family. They had already had a kid. And so he had to develop this whole reason to stay in LA, because you usually shot out of New York because there were kinescopes the West Coast got a worse feed. So he convinced and changed the industry. And because it was at the very beginning of the industry, once that was a hit, everybody else was like, can you make our show? And long story short, he became this mogul and made so much of the industry. And yet, when I wish somebody had done more documenting about the show at the time, because I'm just fascinated by the vibe. And his autobiography is fantastic. But in some ways, David, we're in that same period. Because, for example, you have a big Twitter presence. You're barely on Instagram.
Right? I would like to be more on Instagram. I'm just not smart enough.
Congratulations. You first of all, you have a million pictures of you with the biggest celebrities that if you met one of those celebrities in your life, you'd be like, did I ever tell you about the time? And that's most of your you know, that's most of your existence is a photo that people would get once in your lifetime. That's your Wednesday. But I think on going back in history, I Love Lucy, you know, radio was still big and then it took off. And so right now, Instagram, we're in this flux of like this interview right now. We couldn't schedule this on network television because the network would close down. But for 5,000 dedicated fans around the world, it's an interesting perspective to hear. So that's why initially I'm like, oh, let me just try and remember everything that I can about the show and let the people that did it tell their stories. Because even that little tidbit that I didn't know, that Ray and Phil invited you to say, well, you were probably an oasis of a good review. So they were like, oh my gosh, I don't know, you know, let's, before they stone him to death for writing a good review about Raymond, let's get him in here.
Well, sir, they invited me in. I did an interview, I think, with the two of them that ran. And then I think when I trace it back, my friendship with your gang was, and it was a gang. It was often violent, and it was the Crips and the
Mentions.
Yes, the Mentions, exactly. And I think what happened was it was really, the bond was furthered by 9/11, because when that happened, I was just breaking into writing some TV, and guy Joel Gallen asked me to be the head writer for the Tribute to Heroes. And that was on, I think 9/11 was on a Tuesday. The call went out to do this on the Friday, and then it was going to have to be done like basically the whole next week, and that was it. It just had to be put together. And I went to but my wife, my then new wife, Fran, said, you have to go to a temple event on the Sunday. I saw Phil, who I obviously knew already a little bit, and I said, Phil, I'm just a humble scribe. I need you to come help me. And we worked together on that, wrote what ended up being for Ali and Will Smith, and we wrote a lot of stuff together, and the show won a Peabody and all Emmys and all this. And that, I think, that helped. Ever since then, I've been having lunch with Phil and some variation of you guys. And then we went on tour together, which I don't know if you're going to get to, but yeah, that tour was really where a lot of bonding happened.
Yeah, and we should go back. Tribute to Heroes was the biggest collection of celebrities you could gather into one place, I think, ever, other than like the MGM dinner that they would have in 1949. There's shots, if you look on YouTube, where they're just dollying the camera past, and there's Frank Sinatra, there's, you know, Clark Gable, there's Ava Gardner, and it's star after star after star. And Ray, I did go to that. Ray was only allowed to bring one person, so he chose me. And it was usually it's more to help, you know, assess stuff and maybe come up with something funny, or whatever. I think the tone was more serious than funny at that point.
Bad serious, yes.
Yeah. So, but it was a giant event that you had to do. So it's no small thing when you say about it. And I remember going into a room, and it was, I want to say, Muhammad Ali, Julia Roberts, Penelope Cruz. It was
Clint Eastwood. It was
an insane amount of stars.
It was crazy. And I do remember there was a moment Phil and I always talk about, where we had written this thing because in that moment in history, there was all this there were people, and thank God we didn't have a president who was inclined this way, unlike maybe other times. But there was basically this, you know, sort of anti-Muslim vibe that we wanted to counteract. So that was around the moment that Will Smith was going to play Ali. So we got Ali, and Phil and I wrote something for Will Smith to read from Ali, a message that we sort of put together to put out something about, you know, a statement of tolerance and brotherhood. And so then we were sitting, and you might have been there, but we were in this little side green room, and everyone's pushing onto the stage. This is when social distancing was not much of a concern, but I remember Will Smith came in front and was being very gently leading Ali through, and Ali did not look great. He was sort of shaking. You know, he has to have the medication at the right time. But he was it was a little sad almost, even though we were so thrilled to see the champ. And he came right up to Phil and I, and the look, the smile came on Ali's face. I'll never forget it. And he pulled the punch back and went right up to Phil's face, which I'm standing here. And it was like he went right up to the edge and then just broke up, was sort of laughing. And it was like a dream come true. It was like he went from, 100 years old to being exactly the Ali of your dreams.
He's UB Blake sitting at the piano,
Exactly.
or Don Rickles insulting you.
Yes, I've had that too.
Later on. I just, David, only because it's so interesting, and I know that because I'm already inviting you back because we're going to run out of time. I just see the handwriting on the wall where it's, and I kind of wish Ali had landed that punch, because if Phil had a scar, it'd be the greatest story ever. What was that star? I'm just going to read a few comments real quickly.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello from Toronto. Hello, Toronto. Someone just wrote, I heard that, Desi and Sinatra hated each other. What was interesting is, I had heard that as well, but when I read the book, and David, you wouldn't know this because it's such an obscure fact, Sinatra was really down on his luck, and he was planning to do a TV series with Desi through Desi Lou Productions, and he got offered From Here to Eternity. So he went to Desi and said, "Listen, I'm going to take this movie."
Right.
And Desi, what's that?
And let me out of my deal.
Yeah, let me out of my deal. Yeah, not quite as. Not quite as Godfather or Tommy Dorsey
Right.
intensity, but because it sounds like Desi Arnaz had a great way of having people working together. And so he wasn't, and obviously he built this huge team and bought, RKO. So, but I did hear they did have a fight over something else, which I understand. I've heard that every once in a while Frank Sinatra did get into tiffs with people. So now, David, I just want to talk about the writing process of when you were doing the Friends book, we were doing the Everybody Loves Raymond book. And I really do think you would have written the Everybody Loves Raymond book had we not beaten you to it first. And I was half expecting the publisher to go, "Oh, David Wilde already wrote the Everybody Loves Raymond book. So, cool your heels." But were you spending time with the Friends cat? Like, what was the dynamic? Because I was on the inside doing the book, so it was very easy for me.
The dynamic was that I had done a cover story for Rolling Stone on Friends, and it was obviously did really well. It came out just as the show was absolutely exploding, and so when the cast said, well, they weren't sure the book should happen because it was 1 year into the show. It was like during the first, there wasn't even a second season, and Warner Bros. Said, "No, we're doing a book." And they said, "You can only do it if that guy who did the Rolling Stone cover story did it." So it was sort of put on my plate. I had new kids, but yeah, I did. It was fantastic because I already had met the cast before they exploded into the Beatles of sitcoms. And so they sort of let me hang around, at least for a while.
And so was there any, I'm not looking for dirt here or anything on the because we all know they're phenomenally nice people, but when you get that Beatles type celebrity, things change for people. And I don't know if I ever told you this in one of our lunches, but Ray and I, the second season of Raymond, which is the first season we were on Warner Brothers, we wanted to go to the set of Friends because to us Friends was a cool show. Right? And
Yep.
Everyone's Raymond, yeah, okay, it's a good show, but Friends had this energy to it. And so there was a call made and whatever, and then Ray and I are on the floor, which means we're there on the side, and we got kicked off the stage. We were asked to leave the stage. And so I remember thinking, okay, yeah, the show Raymond doesn't have high ratings, but the fact that, you are throwing Ray Romano off the stage, like, is he a threat or, and then at the same time as well, for the security, you could wander onto the Everett Raymond stage at any point. Like, you could literally walk into, and are you here to see Ray? Yeah, he's up in his dressing room. You know what it's about?
Exactly.
I need some, On Friends, one time I was visiting with my friend. So now it's 4 years later. And I just walked onto the Friends set on a Tuesday with my friend. I go, let's just look. And I knew the head of security of Warner Brothers at the time. So I was like, look, let's just walk on and see. I don't think they rehearsed or anything. Let's just walk. I think we got about 10 feet onto the stage and we were swarmed by security. Now, of course, they have, we're having fun, and we're security has the specter of stalkers and this, and everything is a serious threat. So that's why I say once Friends became like the Beatles, I'm just curious, was your access a lot less, or was it?
Well, it was funny because I watched it sort of happen. I went with them at the end of the first season. I went with them to Chicago to the Oprah show, and it was madness. Like, who was the sort of scummy show?
Jerry Springer.
The Jerry Springer show sent like sexy girls in limos to like take off their shirts and try to get them to come onto that show. It was like there was madness once. Now they almost got thrown out of the Oprah show because someone tried to sneak a cigarette in the basement, and they literally got reprimanded. I was with them at that one. I won't reveal who, not because I'm dedicated to them, but because I can't remember. But someone tried to smoke a cigarette. But then what's funny is then I had kids. I didn't watch every show for the whole time because just my work and my family. But I liked the show and loved the show. But then also fell in love with Raymond. Of course, I watched every Raymond. And then when the show was ending, the same thing happened. They wanted to do a book, and the cast would only agree for it to be me, which put me in a much better negotiating position. And so I did a second book. And I'm sitting by hoping that after we get off this, they'll call and say, keep doing books.
Yeah, David, keep more. By the way, the popularity of Friends, and you know this, Phil did Exporting Raymond, which was a great documentary about his time in Russia. I did that in Warsaw with another show. The universal appeal of Friends is astounding. And Raymond is pretty close, not in popularity, but in universality. You know, Seinfeld doesn't play. Seinfeld doesn't play at all.
I'm going to say here, and I'll say it to Phil Rosenthal's face, I think Raymond is better. I'm just going to say that for you. But the thing is, if you think about it, they're kind of...
Hold on, David. Jennifer Aniston just came into my house. So do you want to, is there any...
Hold on. I'd like to get David to come out here and correct that. The absolute interesting thing to me is what I realized about Friends, because when you write these books, you know, you think too much about shows. Friends is like, why do you turn on a TV? Because you're looking for friendship, for human contact. So it's almost like filling a void at moments when you're not maybe feeling surrounded. If you actually have friends over, you maybe don't have to watch Friends, except during a pandemic when people just have to watch TV nonstop. Raymond is the opposite. Raymond is about family. And just feeling like everyone who's ever had a crazy mother, which is everybody except me.
Yes, of course. Mother-in-law, you mean? Mother-in-law.
My mother-in-law, she's the best. In any case, let's stop talking about Friends.
But yeah. Well, I wanted to bring it up in contrast because when you were doing the book, I was talking to you and I said, David, and you were looking through my photos and you said you have so many more photos than I have access to. I mean, I had 30,000 photos, and you had, you know, I don't know how many, but you're forced to pick from the outside. And I decided early on, I'm like, let's have Ray and Phil write this book. Let's have Ray and Phil write their description of what's going on in these photos. And it's so much more powerful to hear it from them, because when they were pitching the book ideas to us, when HBO, who owned it, you know, without getting told the business details, they said, well, we're going to make up a history of the show, of the character, all this kind of stuff that could work on another show, but we're like, why make up stuff? It's so rich in real life, and Phil and Ray were mining their real lives, so let's have them tell the story. And the Simon & Schuster, the publisher, said, absolutely not. We will not.
Yeah, who would want that?
And I said, let's handwrite. Let's do them handwrite their captions. So I have pictures of Ray handwriting and Phil handwriting under the things, and they go, no, we will not allow handwritten. It's not allowed. They fought every step of the way, and it's such a, I mean, I made the book, so I'm biased, but it's such a good book. It's such a insightful and honest book, as the series was, you know? And so and the thing, when I saw you, David, this was one of the most painful moments.
There are a lot of painful moments when people see me.
Yes. When we were in, I think we were in Montreal, but then later we were at the Comedy Cellar. For some reason, you and I were in the Comedy Cellar, and I don't remember why, in New York City. which if you watch Ray's Netflix stand-up special, he is there as well. But the whole cast of Raymond and Phil were going to be on Oprah, which is a whole nother story. But I said to Phil and Ray, please, please, please just bring out the book. Because the book publisher, I said to them, are you going to advertise? I was on the phone with them, David. I said, are you going to advertise? And they said, listen, the only thing that's a real hit is if Oprah Winfrey holds up a book. I go, well, that doesn't happen because it just doesn't happen. So I see you in the cellar and I go, well, how is the book doing? You go, oh, well, bestseller, because Oprah Winfrey held up the book and said, you must buy this book.
What
and
she actually said, I'll never forget it, because the way that book worked, it was fantastic because I was the only writer allowed on the set for the finale. So they embargoed the book, and they did a magazine edition that came out in grocery stores, a real book. There were like 4 different editions, and they were all embargoed till the morning after the last episode. So I was one of the only outsiders on the set of that last episode. In fact, I watched it with Paul Rudd, who had been in the show but wasn't in the finale, but he was allowed. It took Paul Rudd to get he got to sit next to me, stand and watch the finale be taped. But the day that the show ended, from that moment it ended, for the next 24 hours I was on interviews. It had me doing promotion on radio stations, right and left. You know how they do that. And I'm just promoting, thinking I can make a difference. And then I sort of looked up at 3 p.m. the next day, and there's Oprah with the cast. And she said these words, Friends doesn't have to be over. You can buy, because the cast has written this great book. And she didn't say my name, and that was the best thing ever. If she had said David Wilde had written this great book with the help of the cast, that sales plummeted. But it went right to #1 because she made it very personal.
Yeah, that's an unbelievable story. So when Phil and Ray were going, I go, oh, that's right, David Wilde. Okay, now Simon Schuster said, do this. Okay, so I emailed Phil. I didn't go to Chicago, and I said, Phil, and he goes, it's even better. She's giving it away to the entire. And I said, that's fantastic. But what she did was put it in a gift bag under their chairs. So the book was never mentioned. Oh. And so it prevented it from being, a bestseller, which is not much. And it's funny because in the book world, let's say a bestseller is 200,000 copies, David, right?
For you, yes.
A television show has millions and millions of viewers, at least back then. So my agents are like, why are you wasting your time with a book? It's no money and nobody, Anyway, but the book, David, your book is fantastic. I thanked you in my book. I misspelled your name, and I want to apologize to you for misspelling your name because
E.
I added E at the end, like Oscar. I guess is Oscar Wilde.
Uncle, my Uncle Oscar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, by the way, there's never. I think just going back to, and then we can get off of Friends. Friends is for a certain audience, and Raymond is for a certain audience. So it's neither good, But as far as just the one thing that Raymond had was you had Ray and Phil as a through line for the entire series, and most of the writers not changing. So you had a consistency that I don't know that you've had on any other sitcoms, and that comes through.
Yeah, I think the showrunners, I think I was with Phil at the time, he was getting these crazy offers to leave and overall deals to go and do other shows. I think I was around him when he realized, I like this show. You know how he suddenly turns into Knock him the Beggar and Fiddler on the Roof. He goes, I'll just do this very nice show that I love, kind of thing.
And I think, just to clarify for people watching, when you do a hit show, the networks and studios come to you and say, listen, David, you've done this hit show. And these are not exaggerated numbers. David, here's $15 million. Leave that show.
Oh, we're play acting? Or are you offering me this?
I'm not offering. And you can come and try and develop other shows for us. So the network came to Phil. I think it rhymes with Fisney. And they offered him a crazy amount of money. So that's the story that David is telling. It's a development deal where you leave. And so Phil, thank goodness, said, you know what, I'm going to stay with this show. And, it obviously would not have been the same without Phil. By the way, thank everybody. the book is out of print. I know you can get used copies of the Raymond book and the Friends book on Amazon or on eBay. And what's weird is there's certain things, and I'm sure the Friends book printed many, 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 many more than our book. Our book, I see a lot of high prices, and the Desi book always goes for, $100 on eBay, $100, $250. And so someday, I'm not saying hurry, but for the Everest Raymond book, I do see those prices rising, and I make zero money from the sale of those books. So I know that people who are real fans of the show will really enjoy the show.
I loved your book. I loved your show. It's really interesting because I was growing into being married, having in-laws, and all this. My life evolved into being, Raymond. Except nobody loves me except when.
Well, I think David, that's what, for relatability. I think when you're young and you're watching with your parents, you're watching the family dynamic. When you're single and you're college, a little bit after, Friends or Seinfeld is so much more relatable in many ways. But yes, there are many people that have never seen Seinfeld, never seen Friends. I get it. So now, David, getting back to just what is your feeling of the popularity of the show, right? It slowly was this steady performer. They moved us to Monday night, and that's when the show actually took off. Then it became 9 a.m. Then they put us against Ali McGraw and Monday Night Football, and we're dead. And then it kept doing well. And what do you think? Because I do want to get into how a show gets on the air, right? But what do you think as far as, and don't think too much about this, but just for a show like that to remain on the air, and then the fact that they didn't really do other shows like it. It was unpopular idea when it went on the air. It was unpopular idea while it was on the air, and it was unpopular after, the idea of a boring family sitcom, or mundane. I don't want to say boring, but a banal, existence.
It's because it didn't jump on a bandwagon. It just built its own, path to success. And it's interesting. I don't know if this is pretty inside, but Phil and I would go on for years to help with CBS on their upfront. And we've watched a million shows get pitched and a million shows die a death. And, it's not unlike childbirth and sperm. I mean, it's like it's mainly a story of death and not scoring, but it has to be something special. And that's the problem, is a lot of times, like that year that I was reviewing Raymond, it was literally like 400 friends. There was sort of Black friends, Latin friends, slacker friends. It was like literally 400 variations on Friends. And so Raymond would have stood apart just by nature of it being so low concept, but it also stood apart because it was great. And it's unusual. Like, one thing, Tom, I don't know if people know this, but Linda McCartney liked me. Ray Romano liked you and still does. And Ray, the interesting thing to me is it was, in building that sitcom around him, it was, he had done very little. I guess he'd been fired from news radio, right? There's that amazing story, because I wrote about radio in the book, in the showrunner's book too. So I knew that story. But the funny thing is that my wife now thinks, if you asked her who were her favorite actors, Ray Romano during Parenthood, and for me during Men of a Certain Age, became one of my favorite actors. And that's The Big Sick as well, where I thought wow, he might be the best performance in that movie alongside all these amazing performances. And that must have been an amazing thing to watch, because that was a case where it's with all due respect to Jerry Seinfeld, they put him around some good actors, and he didn't become a great actor. He stayed, but he was able to, it lifted the show. But the amazing thing about Raymond is you put him around Doris Roberts and Peter Boyle, and everybody got great. With the possible exception of you, everyone got great at that.
Well, I think, yes, it's a very, very good point. And I think you have that challenge. I think about Robin Williams. Robin Williams went on to an insane career, but had he just been Mork from, where was he from?
Mork from Ork.
Yeah. He outlived the Nanu Nanu. And Ray, when, they called the Golden Cage a sitcom, you're pegged as that character. So the good news is you're on a giant hit sitcom. The bad news is you're on a giant hit sitcom, and you're that potentially that for life. And so Ray has been, and I think you know, really the best comedies are just dramas with
Laughs.
fun.
Right.
Yeah. Because you're invested. And I think a lot of the shows that came out where they're a little bit more cartoony, and some of the shows like 30 Rock, I don't think I've ever seen so many great jokes in such a short time. Like that, I'm like, these are unbelievably funny jokes, but you don't really get invested in the character so much. And on Raymond, not nearly as many laughs as 30 Rock, but
yeah, but I will tell you the heart of it, exactly right. But it's interesting to me is that also, I think one of the reasons Raymond is one of the greatest shows in TV history and will be viewed that way by other generations, it's going to be around, is that it was actually a real reflection of the people working on it. Like, I toured with you guys. I've toured with rock bands. It was not the same thing. I've always felt like the least cool guy on any tour I've ever been on, but not when we toured around the world with Raymond. I was almost, by the theory of relativity, stretching it. I was relatively cool. Like, you were the nicest group of guys. I never heard a disrespectful comment about anyone or anything. I never heard. It was like, you know, the pushiest Phil would ever be, as successful and genius as he is just if there was a pizza place in Arizona that wouldn't let us in, he might then get a little pushy. But it was the nicest group of guys. I was the least nice and the coolest one in the group, which is sad.
well, yeah, let's talk about that just a little bit, because as someone who knows the ins and outs of rock and roll, and so you've written liner notes for Rolling Stone albums, you know Van Halen. I mean, it's such I can't. It's easier to list the rock stars that you haven't worked with. That would be the shorter list. So when we initially did an Inside the Writers' Room, it sounds like the world's worst idea. Writers talking about writers. There is no more boring thing. Writers are just a boring idea. But the way it came about was there was an Aspen Comedy Festival, and we did a one-time thing at the height of the show of us talking about the show. So everybody at this festival was interested in comedy or writing or something. So it got such a big response that from the people watching it, it was like standing room only, and we felt like, oh, people care, and not like no one cares. It's just boring. You know, yes, you can have a writing seminar where people want to go, but not to entertain people. Writers to entertain people, not said very often. And so after that show, which went so well, someone said, we can book you. We can book this show. And long story short, the show ends up getting booked. And there's a funny little element where we were introduced to a small time booker, let's say.
Broadway Danny Rose plus time.
Yes. And so Phil said, well, I have the biggest agents in the world, and they'll do it. But thank you for the offer. And Phil's biggest agents in the world, and this is where we could talk for a few hours. Agents are as great as people as they are. They're very much more interested in what is the percentage of the total income that I will be getting from your next project. And doing a live tour of studio or of theaters with writers could be making people hundreds of dollars, okay? And a hit sitcom makes $1 billion. So when that got weighed, Phil goes, my agent's not returning my call. Like, I don't get it. So cut to, we went back with the Broadway Danny Rose guy, who was phenomenal. And so he said, Phil said, we'll do all the biggest cities. We'll do Chicago, we'll do New York, maybe London. We'll do everything. And then the offers came rolling in. Irvine, smallest cities in America, got offered to us. And I don't remember how Phil approached you, but you were the perfect person to host it because you're a great interviewer, and the whole job is to make other people shine when you're the host of that thing. And you were great at it. And so I think we did, and I'm saying this for this reason. I've already set the preface up. It's a terrible idea to watch writers talk. But I think, let's say we did 30 shows. We got probably 29 standing ovations.
It was the most fun I ever had.
And
the best.
And the reason I think that is, David, is we were basically, it was just let's say there was 7 people, who had sat in a room together for 9 years trying to be as funny as possible. And so it was like a very, very good band that is used to playing all the time together, just playing hundreds of sets together. And so when you saw us on stage, you're a pretty well-oiled machine. Add that to real stories of what happened in our real life, how that became the sitcom, then Q&A, then highlights and bloopers that you couldn't show on TV. That's why it became such a good show. But you toured with us, and yes, a lot of the show's success is because Phil was hearing the real life story. So when people are like, "Oh my gosh, that story is so relatable," it happened to some. There's very few just made up stories on Raymond, if any.
That's what, like, you had mentioned. You might ask me my favorite show, and it's funny. Is like the ones from that we talked about in that show, which came from real life, always come to mind. Especially like Baggage, like and like when my wife is now bored of hearing me talk, but when she was here, she goes, "What's your favorite episode?" She sort of knew I would probably be asked that, and I said, she goes, "Baggage." It's because it's not anything other than the kind of joke that you and your spouse might, it's a joke that,
and that one
lasts
yeah, hopefully I'll have Tucker can join. By the way, one of the challenges, David, when we were talking about this, we're in this weird time of history, half of the writers aren't on Instagram, so they have to borrow their kids' Instagram account.
Well, but can I tell you that when I learned something from you and from I guess Lou, who's a real performer at heart, and a couple, like, it was interesting. The guys who were the stand-ups on that in the writers' room, the people who had been in stand-up, like, it was listen, the show was super amusing. I walked out and I would tell like a minute or two of things that would get laughs, and that's how good the crowds were. They would laugh at my thing, except after, like, we did 30 dates or 35 dates, we ended up going from Aspen. We did the Montreal Comedy Festival, and we had a bad placement, which you guys explained to me later. We were like 4 p.m. after.
Before. Yeah, I can tell you. Every show we did was almost sold out around the country because the show was really hot. And I should add, when Ray did the show, we would have 2,000 people theaters. Without Ray, we would do 400 people theaters. So there is a certain Ray element there, even though Ray didn't enjoy the shows probably as much as, not that Ray doesn't like doing it, it's just,
Ray doesn't like life as much as the other.
Yes, that's Ray's charm.
Yes.
So for the Montreal show, there was a theater of about 600 people. I posted some pictures on there, and 600 people capacity, and maybe 100 showed up. So when David walked out, and Phil especially also, Phil, who did not do stand-up, it was kind of like a little bit of crickets, because usually David would say a few things, big laughs, and Phil would come out, make a face, giant laugh, and now none of that. And so...
Right, I remember my opening, the first thing I always said was, "Hi, my name's David, and I'm your opening Jew." Nothing,
yes.
And it's like, I had done 30 where I got something, but what the specifics I remember, because you remember your failure moments.
Yes.
And what the real reason there was no one there was, not only was it like 4 p.m., we were directly after the previous audience was for He's Just Not That Into You, which was
the next audience, David, because when we left, because we go, "Oh my God, is Elvis following us?" And it was the book. Greg Barrett wrote a book called He's Really Not That Into You, and he wrote on Sex and the City. And so it was, I'll post a picture, actually, because I took a picture. It was 700 women lined up to not see Everybody Loves Raymond.
Right.
So I think everybody assumed, well, that show must be sold out, whatever that show is before, and that was us. But to our credit, all of the stand-ups were like, "Oh, great, we get to work a little," because we're used to working little clubs and all this stuff. And so I'll have Scrovan on, but at one point I looked at him because he was trying so hard. And he looked at me like, "Are you going to try a little, Tom?" And we felt so great after the show. And I remember you and Phil were a little...
over. You guys did it. I watched you and the other stand-ups, and it's like this crazy look on your face, like, "Oh my God, we have to like earn it." Like,
put on the gloves.
Chuckle Hut. It was like it was a Chuckle Hut from 10 years earlier.
But that's true, because it's not how you earn it when your club laughs when you say, "I'm your opening Jew," and gets a huge laugh. That's not what we're used to. But anyway, I bring up that whole show because you are one of the only people who were on the inside and saw the dynamic between the writers. And I think what you were saying before is true. There was a respect and there's a genuine enjoyability of all these people being in the room together, you know, and the tone is set by Phil and Ray. And I've heard a lot of shows, and David, you've been exposed to a lot more dynamic behind the scenes, but a lot of shows I've read, they don't even have a Christmas party because there's not enough people who can be in the same room together.
Most TV shows and most bands are not like that. Like, I came out here and I remember, like, I was a big Tom Petty fan, still am, God rest his soul. But I remember going to the Christmas party at Tom's house my first year out here, 91. And it was only me and only one heartbreaker was there. You know, George Harris, there was a Wilbury, a couple Wilburys, only one heartbreaker. I said, like, wow, in most work situations, there's issues. But at Raymond, I have to say, it was like, there was so much love. Like, when we would go, like that trip to Hawaii, we all would literally, like, go to breakfast together, go to the beach together. And I felt included, which is ridiculous because I didn't have points. It was great.
I'll put up pictures from that Hawaii gig. The Hawaii gig you're talking about is a 2,000-seat theater at the Blaisdell Theater, which we did 2 back-to-back because the first one sold out. That was probably our best show, and we were in Hawaii.
What I remember about that, though, was we landed in the private airport, and we were watching a Bruce Willis movie, not even a good one. But we miscalculated. Like, Phil was so concerned about when the lunch would be served that we miscalculated. The movie had 15 more minutes, so you had, like, all these guys sitting on a private plane watching the end of a Bruce Willis movie before we got.
David, as I suspected, we have 1 minute left.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
So I'd like to get to my first question.
Yes.
But David, sorry, I'd love for you to come back and you can also, this is the thing, David, you can come on for 10 minutes and say hello. So there is a chance I might be like, oh, let me ask David. Let me see if he can jump, because I don't want it to have to be like, oh, the whole afternoon I have to talk about Tom and pretend to like him. You know, I just think I'm giving you that open invite to jump in anytime.
Pleasure. Other than the fact that I need to make sure the Dodgers were ahead when I started, I just need to go check on that. Other than that, I'm honored to be speaking with you. And I've never told you this, but I love you.
You've told me twice, but you were drinking, David. So this one counts. I will see you again, David. Thank you so much. There's so much more we can talk about. We know we'll hit it on the next go around.
We could talk about jazz and lose everybody. Your passion for jazz.
Yes. And I hope we didn't bore people with talking about a show that they can't attend, but we do have an edited version. Phil and I edited a version, and maybe someday Phil will be able to sell it, because I want to get into the difficulty of getting a show on the air. David, the next time, can we go through that process? Because people don't realize, I think, just how hard it is to get a show to be on the air. To maintain it is one thing, but just to get it on the air.
I produced a show, I think, for TV Land called The Pitch, a documentary about that, and included Raymond in that. It was Phil and some of the cast told those stories, so I got to dig that out of the archives.
We do. So, David, just because you're such a good guest, as I would have suspected, we have a minute 30 seconds left. So just for a tease for the next time.
Yes.
Every year, the network buys, let's say, 300 scripts, and then let's say they see 600 pitches, and they buy, let's say, 100 scripts. Then they produce maybe 15. Then maybe 4, 5, 6 of those get on the air. Those are rough numbers, David, but that's pretty good.
Yeah.
So every single pilot is $1 million. Okay, so they're spending $1 million times $15 million, and they know that 11 million is gone. Right? That's not even including the scripts that they've sold, which is not quite as much money. Ultimately, it comes down to 1 week in New York City with a bunch of people sitting in a room deciding in a very sometimes haphazard way what gets to live or die.
I've been in that room and with Phil and seen that process, and it's fascinating. It is there. In fact, there's books about that. I wrote about it in the showrunners a little, but then I got to live it a little, and it's an amazing thing.
Let's pick up next time, David, there, and then we'll talk
Yes, I'll sit right here and I'll just wait for you to do that.
No, I'll text you, David.
Okay.
You don't have to
All right.
sit there. Yeah, I'll give you a
Okay.
heads up. All right. So great to chat with you, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for watching me. Thank you for validating my existence.
Follow David on Instagram. He's got great pictures.
Yeah, I'm new to this mystical place.